Hey, I'm Barb. I'm the CEO of PredictiveHire. Thanks so much for choosing to listen into my session. So I'm going to talk about the new golden triangle for recruitment. But before I do, just a confession to make, a few straight up front. One is that I'm not a recruiter, but I've done a truckload of recruitment in my time. I'm not a data scientist nor an engineer, but I manage a whole team of them and happen to lead a company that's all about that. What I am is really passionate about the power of human potential and capability, and how can you leverage AI, bring it in as your co-pilot to really help you and your organization unleash both of those. So let's look at what's changing and why. And pretty bleeding obvious that there's a lot that's happened in the first part of this year. Two enormous generational changes, really creating an enormous burning platform and opportunity for HR and recruitment to change. COVID-19, if we look at the positive side of that, which is that now you've finally got that long-standing bias dismantled, that you need to see someone in order to trust that they're doing the work. What we're hearing from executives and leaders is that, in fact, productivity has been massively unleashed through trusting people to work from home rather than the opposite, which is really wonderful. And clearly Black Lives Matter is also going to massively change recruitment, I believe, far faster than it has been, to really require us to look at how we're making those decisions about who we hire and who we promote, and are we doing it in a way that's truly creating fair opportunity for all. But for all of you in recruitment, if you're recruiting right now or plan to, which I assume you are, it's going to have a really big impact on your workload. And that's because there's unfortunately a whole lot more people that are looking for work in Europe, in the US, and also here in Australia. And what that means is that no one's time is going to be served by screening thousands of CVs, but there's also an opportunity out of these two events for you to take advantage of, which is the market for talent now for a lot of these roles, particularly white collar roles, is potentially global. And so you can really raise the bar in terms of quality by looking far broader in terms of where your talent comes from. But let's look at the impact of that on how recruitment thinks about what's important and how it measures success. So this is a framework that I used to hear a lot when I first came into HR, which is that what really matters for recruitment is how quickly, how cost effectively you bring talent in and fill that role, and the quality of people that you're hiring. And I think there's a few reasons for me that just doesn't gel anymore, aside from the fact that it's so obviously very transactional. It feels like you're measuring inputs and outputs, and we know that there's so much more to recruitment, and that's missing from that framework. So it's time for us to really think about what does it mean to bring in the human dimension of recruitment, because recruitment doesn't want to be a process, it wants to be seen as something that's fundamentally human. So to me, and I think this is not that controversial, what does it mean for recruitment to be human? It's fast, it's intuitive, it's something that allows me to express myself and be me and bring my best self to that process. It's non-judgy, I call it. It's something that makes me feel safe. And it's clearly has to be blind screening. I think the days of top of the funnel, using people to do the screening, even CV passes, which, try but are not able to really effectively do blind screening, is no longer going to be acceptable from a human perspective. And I think, what I encourage you all to think about is that for recruitment to be human doesn't mean you're doing all the work. So it doesn't work anymore. So why? What are the dimensions that it misses? I just shared some, the human dimension. But I think the other aspect, when you think about it from an ROI perspective, is it totally ignores the candidate side. And, this is really a very self-serving framework because it talks about it from the organization's perspective. But what does the candidate want and need, particularly at this time? And are we really having a process that's empathetic to the candidate, that's respectful to them? Let's kind of dive a little bit deeper into the human side and why it's so important for you to recognize that there's a business dimension of this, not just a recruitment dimension. So some of these stats will be familiar to you. Hopefully this comes from a LinkedIn report of a couple of years ago. There's nothing really radically new in here. It's basically that if a candidate has a good experience, they're going to talk about it. If they had a bad experience, they're going to talk about it. And what does this actually mean though for organizations? So obviously none of us like to read crappy, reports on Glassdoor about an interview experience that didn't go well, but actually it has a really substantive impact on the business, particularly if you're a consumer brand. And I think really encourage you to understand what that looks like and invest the kind of effort that this organisation did to really quantify it. Now, they're not a customer of ours. This is a public case study that you can read yourself. But you had a new leader that came in that looked at what actually happens when a candidate is rejected in a way that doesn't feel particularly empathetic or convenient. How many of them actually choose to take their business elsewhere? And he actually did some analysis over a period of time to show that it had enormous cost to the business, as you could see, around about £5 million a year. And, that's something that I don't think any recruitment team is really evaluating, is what is the cost or maybe the upside of the way in which they do their recruitment. And if you've got a consumer brand, you can bet your dollar that your CEO will be very impressed if you're looking at it with that lens. So I encourage you to look at not just focusing on your own recruitment ROI, but actually business ROI, from thinking about where you can use AI as your co-pilot. So here it is. It's, not particularly unique to recruitment. For me, this new golden triangle is around three things. It's about automation, because that kind of goes without saying these days in terms of efficiency, and particularly in a COVID world, the need to really drive down costs. It's about bringing smarts, and it's about trust. So what do we mean by automation? Well, as I said, you're going to have a lot more applicants, maybe 100, 200, 300 per role. And your time is not served and your team's time served by looking through those applications or sitting on phone screens. AI obviously is going to do it way faster than what any human can. So think about all the time that you can get back in your team and you can give back to the organisation, because I think another aspect of recruitment where ROI is not being measured and cost is not being measured is the huge opportunity cost of all those people, your store leaders, your hiring managers involved in recruitment. And that has to be considered in a world of, it's all about velocity, it's all about productivity, is you've got to recognise how do you also save them truckloads of time in the way that you think about doing your recruitment. But the other aspect around automation and what it unleashes for you is your chance to widen the funnel. And, I'm kind of amazed at the number of meetings I have where people say, we don't really care about dropout. We're happy if the 10,000 people who apply end up becoming 5,000 because we really don't want to have to worry about the 10,000. And that's just crazy. If you're lucky enough to have an amazing brand that attracts a huge volume of applicants, then why wouldn't you want to take advantage of that and, really test for the latent talent? And reality is technology and automation these days allows you to do that without any incremental cost to you, because most pricing is based on an all you can eat, not based on a variable. So interview the world to get the best talent with AI as your co-pilot, and that way you're giving everyone a fair go. Okay, speed. Speed is an outcome of automation, but it's not the same thing. And what I mean by speed is mostly, again, taking a human perspective and a candidate perspective, which is, it's just expected now that we get immediate gratification, and look at all the different ways in which this has penetrated our life today. Why should I have to wait as a job seeker for even more than a day to know whether or not I'm going to be considered for this role? Respect the fact that people are applying for lots of jobs and they need a job. And in some cases, they need a job to put food on the table. So how can you structure your recruitment process so that you can get back to people as fast as possible? Trust. Obviously, we have to start with bias, because that's something that's so current right now. And I think just to, we all know about this, but, I think what's really interesting right now is you've got these large corporates who are coming out with, grand gestures and proclamations about how much they care about fairness and inclusivity. But at the end of the day, and some of them are even, by the way, pulling back on some of the technology, recognizing that anything that relies on facial recognition is something that's going to potentially perpetuate bias. And I think that's a real challenge for the video platforms, is how do you give confidence that bias is removed and you're not introducing bias through that visual format? What are we going to do about it? I think the first thing is that you've got to actually track it. And I know when I was in HR, it was very hard to really make leaders accountable for their bias when you don't have the data, because we know what gets measured gets done. So look for ways in the technology that you're using that you can actually track it. And one of the things that we're able to do is show from the applicant pool and the hire pool, what do those ratios look like? And really the guidance that I always used to give to my recruitment team is, if your hiring profiles from a ratio perspective are different from your applicant profiles, that on its surface suggests that there might be some bias. And it's that kind of data that's really going to change behaviours within an organisation. Same thing with gender. I think that's often easier to track, but we now have to really start to track ethnicity as well. Removing bias, and I want to just touch on very briefly, is if you're struggling to get your organisations to really buy into this idea of, we now have to really systematise bias removal, is go back to the business driver. It always helps in any change program that you're taking a commercial perspective, which is innovation, which every organisation craves, whether you're a government or whether you're a private sector, comes from difference. And that's way more than just gender and ethnicity. It's, different life experience. And so creating the opportunity to use technology and run your recruitment in a way that truly allows for diversity to be visible, which comes from blind screening, is something that's going to make a difference to the business. So systematise blind screening, please. And to be frank, you're going to have to use AI to do that. It's impossible to do it relying on humans. Let's think about trust from the candidate perspective, because we all know how important that is. And even though it's now going to be a buyer's market, candidates are very influential, as we know from Glassdoor and Whirlpool. And we've got to also empathise for, the reality of how hard it is to find a job right now. And I think, one thing with candidates, there's been a really interesting discussion some of you might have seen on LinkedIn, which is what's the hygiene level of what we need to go back to candidates with. And I think recruiters are the ultimate ghosters and I don't mean it from a personal perspective. I think it's that you're not leveraging technology that allows you to go back to people with dignity, with insight, to motivate them, to help them. One of the things that really smart AI can do, and this is a bit of a plug for ours, is you actually can give people personalized learning, and the difference it makes to them, in their heart, in their level of confidence, is quite extraordinary. And when you do this, you're disrupting, that other huge bias, which is that I get nothing back. It's a black box. So really think about going way beyond just a threshold of, I'm just going to tell you whether or not you've got an interview, help them with their next job. And that's what we say to the CEOs of the consumer brands who use us, which is imagine going out and saying, we've only got so many jobs, but if we can help you just find your next job through how we've helped you to learn through this process, and we feel like we're doing something good, really making a difference to them in how they move into their next role. So no more ghosting, please, with AI as your co-pilot. Okay, smarts. Obviously, we all want to be smarter, and we all try our best. I think every recruiter has the best intention to make a fair decision, to make a smart decision. But, we're not really doing as good a job as we can. And I think that's, again, because we're trying to do it all ourselves. But in recruitment, if you look at engagement surveys and churn rates, I don't think we're doing as well as we can. And that's, I think, because we're not leveraging the technology. And when you look at the power of what that technology can do, and this is now some years old, many of you would have heard of AlphaGo, built by deep learning, playing the game Go against a human being, and it basically won because what it could do was see patterns that the human couldn't. And that's what AI allows you to do, is to see something and see talent that we just can't as humans, for one, because we've got bias, but also allows us to see all those traits that really matter these days. Values is what matters. Soft skills is what matters. So many reports that talk about your hard skills are redundant within about a year, if not less. So you've got to hire people who've got the ability to grow and learn. And so focus on that and get less attached to the experience and the particular job title. So that's my summary of what this framework is all about. I hope you found it useful. And I guess what I'd say ultimately is, the main benefit that you and your candidates and even your hiring managers get from bringing AI into your organization is the human side of it. If you've got time and if it works, please click on that link and you can try it for yourself, and you'll see what it feels like to get learning and what it feels like to share your story about what makes you great. Thanks, everyone.